so let me start this meeting, this conversation. We are working as part of Book Forum Lviv number 27. This is supported by Ukrainian Culture Fund and is possible thanks to Ukrainian Culture Fund, also thanks to European Union Prize for Literature, which I'm happy to invite awarded authors of. And Creative Europe, sorry. So I'm glad to introduce you my guests. It's Jan Carson, an Irish writer. She lives in Belfast, and also she works as a community art facilitator in East Belfast. She specialized in running art projects and events with older people, especially those living with dementia. I'll give like a short explanation because we don't actually have such things as facilitator, community art facilitator in Ukraine. So as far as I understand, it's the person who works with different members of community in trying to work with arts and involve help them open up and go through some difficulties with arts, right? Is it correct? Yeah. Jan has a novel, Malcolm Orange Disappears. She wrote in 2014, and short story collection, Children, and microfiction collection, which she published on postcards, which I really loved. I've seen some of them. They're really great, and I really like the project, maybe because I haven't read the fully all your big novels, but these small things are really cool. And her novel, The Firestarters, won the European Union Prize for Literature for Ireland in 2019, the same year as me. That's why we were lucky to meet a few times in person with Jan. And Lana Bastasic, her hometown is Banja Luka. She grew up in Bosnia, and for 7 years she lived in Barcelona, where she was a co-founder of a Scola Bloom School for Literature, where she was teaching English and American literature and running English creative writing workshop and a book club, which is actually really impressive to me. You write your novels in Bosnian, but you make people learn how to write in English. This is really great. Lana Bastasic first novel, Uhvati Zeca, correct? Or Catch the Rabbit, is awarded with European Union Prize for Literature this year in 2020. And before she had short stories collections, poems, like stories for children published in major literature reviews and anthologies in Balkans, and won local awards too. She is a social activist and dedicated feminist and member of PEN Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we all see that Zoom all became kind of portal to our homes, and it's great that it's still possible for writers to stay connected. I'm really grateful to Lviv Book Forum. They did not give up, and they decided to run this festival virtually. Of course, for all of us, it's very important to have this live communication and to meet, but like we all understand that literature festivals are not only about this week when we all get together, but it's also huge work of festival crew and of writers, and it's really great not to take this temptation to take a break and to take holidays because of lockdown and to skip 1 year, but just to keep the things running and hope that next year's we're going to meet in live somewhere on the globe. So my first question to both of you would be, because we kind of see this series of programs as presentation and pitching of the novels of award-winning authors of European Union Prize for Literature. We see them, I see it as pitching to Ukrainian publishers and readership, because I'm sure like all your novels are interesting and it would be great to have them published in Ukraine. So I would kindly ask you to give a short kind of pitch, short overview of your award-winning novel to tell a bit to potential Ukrainian publishers. Jen, let's start with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Haska. It's really lovely to be here and lovely to see you both. This is The Firestarters, the English language version. It's a magic realist novel. It's set in Belfast, in contemporary Belfast, particularly East Belfast, which is kind of the working class part of the city, mostly Protestant. And it's set across a summer, June, July and August, which we would call marching season. It's when the Protestant community have lots of marches and celebrations. And this particular year has been extremely violent. There's been all sorts of riots going on, and particularly these tall fires, so buildings being set on fire across Belfast. It follows two men, Sammy, who is an ex-paramilitary terrorist who leaves the paramilitaries when he becomes a dad. He wants something better for his children, and he's horrified to discover that his 20-year-old son, Mark, is involved in the paramilitaries and is actually the one who's orchestrating this summer of violence. So Mark is a really bad character in the novel. The other character is Jonathan, who I love because he's kind of based on me. And Jonathan is quite repressed and shy, and he's never had a girlfriend, and his parents don't really get on with him. And he's a doctor, and he answers a house call. He visits a patient in a house, and the patient he visits is a siren, a mythical kind of creature from Greek mythology. It happens to the best of us. And Jonathan's seduced by this woman and left with a little baby, Sophie. And he's not sure if Sophie's going to be a human child or a siren. And if she's a siren, she can wreak havoc as soon as she begins to speak. So it's a novel about Northern Irish politics and where we are now, 20 years after the peace agreement. But it's also a novel about parents and fathers and how much a parent is responsible for what their children do. Whether it's kind of the nature versus nurture question. It's quite dark, but it's also quite funny as well.
Thank you so much. I do see a lot of things echoing with Ukraine these days, and in Ukraine in the past. That's also why I invited you, because it's obvious that you raise very important topics in your novel. Lana, and now you.
I have to say that sounded really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading Dan's novel. My novel is set in Bosnia, and it is a road trip from the south of Bosnia, from Mostar to Vienna. There are two friends. The narrator is of Serbian background, and her best friend is of Muslim Bosnian background. So even though they grew up in the same town, their life stories are very different and determined by their different national, ethnic, and religious identities. So through their road trip together, they decide to go to Vienna to look for one of the characters' brothers who was lost, went missing during the war. But it's only a starting point for them to rethink their friendship and their memories together during the road trip. I wanted the book to be structured as Alice in Wonderland, only in Bosnia, so that each one of the 12 chapters corresponds with the same chapter in Alice symbolically, because I wanted to explore the identity of small girls growing up in Bosnia, which was in a way a wonderland in the 90s, because nothing made sense and there was a lot of violence, and we just felt like we were wrong, we were in the wrong body. So that would be the main idea. I don't like to talk about my book too much. I feel like it's not fair. But I also didn't want to write a typical Bosnian war story novel. I wanted it to be, in a way, magical. And I wanted to talk about friendship, this kind of the complicated formative friendship, and how sometimes in these friendships, we tend to turn our friends into literary characters because we create them in our minds. So I wanted to explore this relationship between the narrator and her friend and their different backgrounds.
I'm really intrigued. Like, I really find this thing, like, reproducing, because there was the description that it looks like Alice in Wonderland, but I thought it's more like metaphorical. But the fact that you actually really reproduce the chapters, like, it's really interesting and intriguing to read. And actually in Ukraine, we have a lot of, quite a few good translators from language from Balkans, from like Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian. So I'm sure there will be people interested in your novel. Before we'll start like conversation on like our main topic about home, what is home for us? Is home a safe place? I would just also ask you very shortly, say what getting European Union Prize for Literature meant for you, and how did it change your literature, like developing yourself as a writer, as an author? Like probably Jan would have to say a bit more, 1 year more. For Lana, this way is only opening, but yeah, still like share your feelings and share your understanding of this, what's happening to you.
I guess I'll go first. Lana, I really enjoyed that and I really want to read it now. It sounds fantastic. And I love the way that the magic coming in as well. It sounds great. Honestly, Haskell, like the number one thing for me about winning the EU prize has been this, meeting writers from all across Europe, and particularly writers who have a similar background to me. When you come from a country that has a post-conflict history, I have really resonated with writers who come from difficult places in Europe, and we've always found a lot in common and a lot to talk about and a lot to learn from each other. So there's been quite a few late nights in bars having a few pints and chatting about all of the things, all the ways we'd like to put the world right if we could. So that's been great. The money has been really helpful as well. I think we're all struggling at the minute with the lockdown and loss of income, and the financial support has been really, really helpful. And then like the third and final big thing has just been giving my work a platform to get new readers across Europe. So I'm very, very fortunate. Lana, you have all of this ahead of you. I'm sure you're excited. We've signed, I think, 11 or 12 translation deals at this stage. So the Italian and the Spanish copies are out now, and it's doing really well, particularly in Spain. So that's super exciting to think about people in other countries reading about Belfast in their own language. So I'm really, really grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have to say it's such a strange year to win an award because yeah, you cannot really go anywhere. I can travel. A lot of these book events were canceled. So at the same time, I felt like really happy, but also it was a bit weird. Like I think I'm not aware of it yet. Maybe once I'm in Brussels in September, if everything goes as planned, then I will be aware of it, because I'm also looking forward to exactly what Jan said, which is meeting other writers, getting inside this network, reading them, discussing things with them, and feeling like I'm a part of something bigger, like a bigger creative network. Because for now, it's all been Zoom and Skype and just feeling disconnected from the world. But I can see already, even though the award happened in May, if I'm not mistaken, I can see the effects already. So I've already received some book deals. People are interested in translating the book, and I can really see how good this award was for me. And but I mean, to me, the most important thing is just trying to get to new readers. I'm interested in seeing how this book will resonate with people who are not from the Balkans, because I don't know if you, Jan, had this feeling of, is this going to be interesting just to people who understand the context, or can it talk to a broader audience? So I'm really curious to see if the book can do something elsewhere. So yeah, I'm extremely grateful and honored, and I can't wait to get in touch with all the other laureates.
Yeah, I actually fully remember these feelings. I really hope it's going all to work and you really go to Brussels and the ceremony will be like offline. Because for me, it actually was, yeah, we were announced in May, and then like, but still before October, I couldn't fully believe this is happening to me. And then, yeah, the ceremony is something really special. So I really wish you like having like the most of it. And yeah, actually I checked your website, Jan. It's also really great. Like it's really nice that you developed such a platform, and it's really well organized. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And what is super cute, you have a rabbit behind you, just like in Lana's book, Uchwati Zajca, catch the rabbit. So you see everything matched perfectly. So my first question connected to our topic of discussion will be, what is home for you? I know it's very general, but like, is home the place of your birth? Like you've been living in Barcelona for 7 years, so probably another city became home for you. Or like, what is the definition of home as such? Where do you feel like home the most?
Well, yeah, I think for me, this has been a very important question in my work, because I've never really felt like any particular place is exactly my home. because we moved a lot, and also here with the situation, the political situation, you're constantly asked, who are you? Where do you come from? And in my case, it's really difficult to answer that question. So when I lived in Barcelona, sometimes I would just give up and just give whatever answer. But otherwise, I would need like 11 footnotes to explain.
Just somewhere there in address.
Yeah, but it's like, okay, I was born in this country, but that country no longer exists. Now it's this country, but in that country, there are actually two parts. I'm in that part, but actually the name of the language that I speak used to be that, but now it's this. So it's like, I know that people aren't that interested in all that. And I always envy people who can just say, I'm Italian and I speak Italian. But on the other hand, I think it helped me look for other homes, or another way of feeling a place as home, not necessarily the place where you come from, but a place where you make friends, where important things happen to you, where you spend some formative years. So I've learned to look on the bright side and think, okay, maybe it's good not to be too rooted somewhere, but no, always find some unaccustomed earth. Yeah, it is a difficult question. I tried to also reflect on that in my book, and I don't know if I found the answer, but I keep asking the question, definitely.
Yeah, I guess I completely resonate with Lana with the complexity of trying to explain you're from a place isn't easy to explain. When you're from Northern Ireland, like some people assume you're Irish, some people assume you're British, some people assume you're kind of some weird entity in the middle. One time someone thought I was from Iceland. You just, wherever you go, everyone has their own version of what the politics of your place are. And I guess in my 20s, I just got really fed up with it, and I left for a long time. So I was away for about 5 years and had an extremely negative concept of what it was to be Northern Irish. So I lived in America and I lived outside London for a while, and I didn't want to come home. I got forced to come home because my work visa ran out, and spent a very, very angry year stomping about Belfast, telling everybody what an awful place it was. And for me, writing has been a huge part of both coming to terms with where home is and also growing to love it. So when the first year I was back here and writing, I exclusively wrote about America. Everything was set in America because I wanted to be there. And as I came to write stories that were set in Northern Ireland, it was like holding a magnifying lens up and looking very closely at your culture and your community, both the good stuff and also the difficult stuff. And that's what really made me feel very tied to home. And I'm now extremely proud to be from Northern Ireland, complicated as it is. And I actually think in some ways, I mean, let's not tell people this too loudly, but I think we're quite lucky to be from places that have complexity about identity, because there's so much to write about. We're never going to get bored of writing about what it means to be Ukrainian or Northern Irish or wherever it is we're from. Whereas, I mean, who wants to be just straight up Italian? That's really dull.
Yeah, that's true. I was actually thinking about that when you both were talking, because it's obvious that like three of us, we share the same experiences and the same attitudes. Actually, my next question sounded if a home is a safe place or it's a source of anxiety and challenge, which I think you already answered. I even picked a few quotes. There is a quote from your book, Jan. They believe themselves brave to come to the city, at the very least open-minded. We wish to say to them, are you mad? Why you have to come here? Don't you know there are other proper cities just 1 hour away by budget airline? There is even Dublin. And in one of your interviews, Lana, you say, it was then that I realized that the Bosnia I was interested in was actually my inner toponym, which had little to do with reality and geographical information, but with memories and emotions of my storyteller. So that's why this trip, at least for me, was like a kind of hypnosis in which you consciously decide to go back to the darkest parts of yourself in your growing up, to dig up the darkest that you have long suppressed and turn into a text. So it kind of shows like all this complexity we have connected with our countries and the places where we grew up. But maybe you could share some, but like for both of you, it looks like there is a positive outcome and you come back in the end and you're happy there. But do you have some hints, some kind of tips, like how make this home, which has so much complexity and brings you anxieties and fears, how to make it a happy place?
I don't know. I think my relationship with Northern Ireland is really complicated because it still frustrates the life out of me. Like there's so much about our culture and our society that's still broken. Like we're 21 years after the peace agreement now and it's still not peace. There's still a lot of terrorist activity, but there's a lot of things around human rights legislation and rights for women and equality rights that have not progressed in the same way as other places, the UK, rest of the UK and Ireland. So there's a frustration there that, you know, I want to get angry sometimes, and I use my writing to get angry about those issues. But one of the things that I think is that you get this strange sense of national pride, and I don't mean nationalism, I mean like it's okay for me to get angry with Northern Ireland because I belong here, but you see, if you came in here and started saying all of this stuff, it's not your place, you're not allowed to make fun of us from outside. And I think I'm writing a collection of essays at the minute about the writer-in community and what it means for a writer to be very associated with a place. And I think that kind of territorialism comes into it, that you're proud of a place, but you can also see it honestly for what it is. And that can be a frustrating relationship. It's a bit like a family, you know, you look at your parents and go, I love them, but they drive me mad. And here's how I would fix them if I could. I guess that's how I feel about place. I feel safe here, but I feel endlessly frustrated as well.
No, exactly. I did feel like it was an echo chamber, and in the way that you had like a limited number of patterns that you could choose for your life, and then you have to follow this one pattern. And if you don't, then there's something wrong with you, or you're a bit weird. And of course, this is especially hard on women because it's still a deeply patriarchal society. So you are given the way, how to look, how to dress, how to talk, what to do. And then of course, what I wanted to explore in my book too, is that if you have this name, it means that you're this, you pray to this God in this way, and you go to this church. So it felt, for me, I mean, it's not that you feel like you're better than someone. It's not about that. It's just like feeling like there could be something else. And then maybe you have the right to create your own pattern and choose your own pattern. And for me, I could really feel early on that I had this urge to go somewhere else, to see something else. Better things, worse things, but just different. I just wanted it to be different, because I could really feel, and you can hear it in the language, how people are not even using language creatively anymore. Like you can just hear the same phrases, fixed phrases repeated. You know, it could be a family lunch, it could be a talk on TV, it could be going out with your friends, and you feel like, I know who is going to say what. Like it's everything is like prescribed, no, like a scenario, or like scripted. So I had the need like to just break away and see something else. And then also here, I mean, then just like Haska was saying, we did have this huge, you know, after the war and everything, now suddenly we have McDonald's, and we have all these new brands, and there's all this music, and everybody's, I don't know, into Britney Spears or whatever. But then you feel like you get all this, like transition has happened, but the country did not move forward. So you get like this weird mix of I don't know, women not being completely emancipated, but we have McDonald's. You know, it's like we are missing some steps here. Like it's not enough to just dress as Britney Spears, but then follow the same sexist pattern as always. So I did feel like it helped me just to get away. And then, you know, like for me, it was a shock, but moving somewhere else. And then I see a woman who doesn't shave. I mean, now we just take it as, of course, like everybody has the right to choose. But for me, it was a complete shock. It's just this idea of seeing something that you have never seen. Not to mention other cultures, other races, other languages. And then you go out and you're like, wow, you can do that, and you can do this, and you can do that. You know, it's like reading James Joyce for the first time, and you feel like, you can do this as a writer, you know, this is allowed. So for me, it was like this, just like traveling. And then of course, finding your own, like believing that you maybe have your own pattern, or just creating your own pattern. That was very important.
In Ukraine in 2000s, and like still now, we had this thing like that everything that was cool, nice, clean, well made, it was had this prefix Euro. It was like everything was Euro, everything nice was Euro, like Euro, like, I don't know, cleaning, Euro remote, Euro repairing of the apartment. And like for people, it's really like to go to like to be part of Europe. For them, it's mean just like, you know, technically better life in the sense of like comfort and well-being. But like, yeah, they're still like very conservative and homophobic. And like, this is not about being part of Europe, but being part of Europe is about this, like, yeah, you have like a lot of that in Balkans still, this like repairing of the apartments with all these chandeliers and chic. And it's called, in Ukraine, it's called Euro. Like, yeah, it's really, really funny how it twists. Like, and when people travel to Europe, it's like, oh, Paris is so dirty. Like, you know, where is all this glamour I was looking for? Yeah, I totally understand.
And suddenly everything is in English. Like if you want to open a bar, you give it a name in English. You never give it a like a Bosnian name or a Serbian name. It has to be in English. Otherwise, it's like lame.
Lame, yeah. Yeah.
That like the UK is going to leave the EU in January. Like. And yet the common language is still going to be English probably. And yet, you know, well, you know, most people in Ireland also speak English, but that just seems strange to me that the common language that brings most people in the EU and Europe together is English, and the English have just left kind of thing.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So like basically like talking about this traveling and moving around and going to different places and seeing things there, which is like really important for us as writers. But do you also feel like through your writing and even just traveling as a person, do you feel like you're telling your story, and like do you have this mission? I mean, yeah, like if I could say so, like, you know, this aim to share your stories with the other countries, because I picked one quote from Jan, like proving that we all want to be heard. And I think here, like if after this quote, we'll see that, like, you know, we all here are competing, because there is a very similar passage in my novel when my hero Martha, she's in Paris and she gets this crab from like food from somewhere, and the waiter says like, "Are you Russian?" And she's outraged because like it's something that happens to us everywhere. Like everyone assumes we are Russian, and we try to explain like, no, this is this country doesn't exist anymore, but there are two languages. Yes, we do speak Russian in Ukraine too. Like basically, you know the story, Lana. And yeah, you said we continue to believe that across the sea, Europe and also the world is holding its breath for the next chapter in our sad story. The world is not waiting for us. They'll allow their voices around the table now. African, Russian, refugee. They say terrible things in words that require translations. We are wet paper in comparison. But do you have this feeling that like we kind of through our writing we share the stories of our countries, and we want us to be heard?
Yeah, I guess that little bit that you read is a paraphrase of a section from the poet Louis MacNeice's poem Autumn Journal, which he wrote about the north of Ireland almost 100 years ago. So it was kind of my, not everybody will pick it out, but it was my kind of wee joke to go, Northern Irish people are still yelling, listen to us, we're extremely important, like 100 years later. And there's a joke in Northern Ireland that regardless of what political conversation around the world you get into, the Northern Irish person will always say, that reminds me of something that happened in Northern Ireland. And I guess it probably works for a lot of places that have a history of conflict. You know, you say, oh, what's going on in the Middle East, or what's going on in Kashmir or wherever. It's very similar to what we have, because we can only see our experiences through the lens of our own experiences. I've been thinking a lot over the lockdown about empathy, because we've all been, I don't know if it's the same where you are, but the phrase "we're all in the same boat," has been used a lot here, and we're not all in the same boat. Everybody is having a completely different experience of COVID-19, and you can't possibly expect to empathize with someone who's in a different situation from you. All you can do is use the building blocks of what similar experience you have to try and imagine what they're going through. So I think sometimes we run the risk of going, I completely understand what it was like to grow up in Bosnia or the Ukraine or wherever. I don't. I'm just taking the bits that I have of it growing up in the Troubles in Northern Ireland and trying to say they're comparative. So I think there is that. The other thing for me that's been really important is I want people to listen to my story specifically. In Northern Ireland, there's a Protestant narrative and a Catholic narrative. And I say this with like no shame about it, but we are the bad guys in the story. You know, the Protestant community are the people who came over and took the land. And so our story isn't very popular. When you go to America and talk about Northern Ireland, they only want to hear the Catholic narrative. That's what's in the Hollywood movies. That's what's in the famous books about Northern Ireland. So for me to come and say, can I tell you the other side of the story? It's not all nice, it's not all good, but I think it's important that you hear both sides of the story here. That has become really important to me, because how can you make a nuanced decision about what happened in Northern Ireland unless you're hearing to all the experiences? And I guess I'll finish with this. I was listening last night to the American short story writer Laura Vandenberg was releasing her short story collection, and they talked about place as well, and how you write well about the place that's closest to you. And she said you always have to come at it kind of slant from the side. And for me, making sure that it's not just the primary narrative of my story that gets told, it's the smaller voices on the periphery. So, you know, we don't have a lot of ethnic diversity in Northern Ireland, but we're beginning to have that. Where are those voices? Where are the voices from the LGBT community? Where are the voices of the rural people in Northern Ireland? So I'm trying to bring those into the story, so it's not just a very obvious straight down the line narrative. And it sounds like that's what you're doing too, Lana, and bringing out the voices of the women as well.
Yeah, this really resonates with me, because it's quite similar that there are a lot of stories about Bosnia, and usually they're told from the victim perspective. And I feel like these books and these stories are very important, but we need to have all these other perspectives. So it was the same thing that I moved from Croatia, where we were the minority, and suddenly I live somewhere where my people, whatever that is considered the majority. And I realized it wouldn't be fair for me to tell this story from the point of view of a Muslim woman, because I don't have that experience. Even though I was close to it, it's not my experience, and I would feel, I don't know, it wouldn't feel right using that to just write a book that would sell well or whatever, because I don't want to do that. It's almost like prostitution in literature, like using, this kind of experience that's not yours. And so I realized what I have to write about is being part of the bad guys, or this part of the story, and also talking about the privilege I have to even write the book, the privilege I have to even have had the education to even be able to just speak, to have the voice. So that has to be part of the story, how this narrator has this privilege over this other friend. And this was really important for me. And also, like what you said, like let's look at the story from different sides, because I think when it comes to the Balkans, the war happened decades ago. It's done, it's over. But what's staying is the stories. So for my generation, and now younger people too, the war is actually just a story. And the story is always, as you know, as writers, it depends on who is telling it.
Yeah.
From what is the point of view, what is the motivation. So you realize that this is what's happening, is that you have different narrators in the Balkans creating different stories for all the wrong reasons. Let's count these victims, oh, but we have more, oh, but you did this, oh, but you did it first, etc. It's just this terrible thing of revising history. And I felt like the real story about the war should be the story about the storyteller. The story about who is it, who is talking, and from which perspective. That is the important question for my generation, because we don't remember what happened. You know, you can't really talk about facts when you were 5. And if you open our textbooks from that era, it's like if you go to one part of Bosnia and take this, I don't know, a 3rd grader's textbook, history textbook, and if you go to the other part, it's like a completely different story. So I realized this is a question of storytelling. And I guess to go back to Haska's question about how maybe through writing, I feel like if the book is good, it's always going to find something human in however local the context. It should find something about, okay, this is what it meant to be human in Bosnia in the 90s growing up, but something that can resonate with other people. We all tend to think that our story is the most special one, that nobody has suffered, etc. But you actually find that there are some similarities, even though it's all different experiences. We're all trying to talk about this, how we dealt with this situation, how it made us different, and what humanity we could find in it. And I think this is where writing can connect these completely different experiences, respecting the fact that you will never understand somebody else's experience, but try to make the gap. Okay, this is this step of me. I don't know if I read Jan's book or if I read Haska's book. It's like, this is me trying to understand something, and what connects me is the human thread, not the local one. And I'm going on and on.
I'm going to jump in on that because it's something I think is super interesting. Like, why do we use story? The beginning of the Firestarters, there's the first chapter is an unpicking of truth. The idea of, same in Northern Ireland, depends who you ask what happened here, you get different stories, depends on what mood they're in. So it makes you question truth. And we don't have a museum of the Troubles because it's impossible to put together a factual timeline of what happened. Everybody disagrees about what happened. So facts have gone out the window. And I think we sometimes feel that story is a softer kind of less important kind of truth. But story to me it's an active element. So when you tell a story, you're inviting the listener or the reader into it. They have to interpret, they have to think for themselves. So you can't sit passively and be told facts. You're jumping into it. And I think that's super exciting for a writer to go, I don't know if you're like me, I love it when people have different interpretations of your story because it shows me they've actively engaged with the text. And we need people here in Northern Ireland to learn that as a skill, because if you can actively engage with something, it's not about black and white or right or wrong or our side or your side. It's about empathizing and feelings and understanding and growing and maybe being wrong sometimes. So that's why story to me is essential, because it's active rather than passive.
Yeah. Thanks for this insights. Actually, Lana, when you were talking about experience of your region, I was traveling around like few summers ago, and for me it's interesting that you say like war was over a few decades ago, and for us it's already a story, which probably is so luckily, but like I really still feel a lot of it in the air, because like, and probably if I would go to Northern Ireland, there are like all these marks, like, in people talks, in attitudes. I remember we had this taxi driver who obviously, like, for him, it was part of therapy. He was repeating like, because the thing is that like we had him like with a break of 2 weeks. So just accidentally. And like, he was telling the same story, like, why did I go to war 20 years ago? Why did I have to waste 2 years of my life? Was it important? Like, and it was really like, it was kind of speech he was almost learned by heart. Like, and he didn't recognize us. He was just like telling the story probably to everyone who got into his car. And so like all these marks of wounds are still present. because in Ukraine we had like different experience, because before the current war that started in 2015, we basically, the last reference for us was Second World War, which was like, you know, all about heroes fighting fascism, and it was really different. Like there were like kind of, you know, we got used to the fact that there are no sides, there is just evil and good. And yeah, so like the experience was shocking for us. And there is this question that is connected to this, like, did you ever had some kind of overreactions of local publics? Because I know, like from my experience, that like if you show both sides, if you don't describe all things in a good way, if you say like, okay, I'm talking from my voice, but we are also bad guys, it obviously leads to some kind of overreacting and saying, blaming you for being not patriotic enough, or like, you know, showing like the like, yeah, taking side of the enemy or things like that. Did you have such experiences yourself with your books at home or outside of home?
Should I go?
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it's very difficult to talk about, because you always feel like, am I arrogant? Do I think I'm more important to these people than I actually am? But the truth is that in my hometown, so this is the majority here is Serbian Orthodox population. And of course, my book is talking about a Muslim girl in this town who had to change her name and whose brother went missing. So I could see that they were not exactly happy with the fact that I chose this, you know. So there was always somebody telling me, but why don't you write about our victims? We also had victims. It's not like we were all bad guys, etc. And then of course, you know, I was hurt in a way, because when my book, when I got the European Union award, there was like nobody like invited me here in my hometown to say anything in the media. I don't know why. And then I don't know. I had this interview on Catalan television, and I realized this is the first time I appear on TV with after this award, and it's in Catalonia. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, no? But then at the same time, you try not to be this narcissist of, oh, that's, yeah, there are people sitting in some room talking about me. Maybe not, maybe they just don't care, right? But I did get this, especially here in Banja Luka, when I did have when I promoted my book, questions from the audience. What about us? We also suffered. Why don't you write about that? And then I felt like, yeah, but if I'm going to talk about how hard it was for my family to be Serbian in Croatia, I feel like a Croat should write that book. I feel like a Croatian person should write about the ethnic cleansing in Croatia. Like, to me, it makes more sense, like, deal with your thing. No, I grew up in this town, and this is what I saw. And what I saw was that I was very much privileged to some other girls in my school. And I feel like it's my responsibility as a writer to look at the bad parts too. Not to write, you know, like a tourist info, whatever, booklet. But it is our, I can't remember who said that, but we are supposed to be the bad conscience of, as writers, of our societies. And it doesn't mean that you always have to be negative towards your own people. It's just that you open your eyes, you open your ears, and you see things, and then you write about them. And not everybody's going to be happy, but, well, in Ireland, we have a great tradition of writers not being accepted and being criticized for writing about things they were not supposed to write about.
I think in Ukraine, this problem also exists because after the Soviet Union, the censorship and propaganda was very strong. And basically, like, although everyone was against it and everyone understands it bad, people got used to this thing that, like, literature is a part of propaganda. So basically, like, Ukrainian national literature was opposed to Soviet literature, which was propaganda of communism and USSR. And then we said, like, okay, we had this generation of writers in 1920s who were killed by Soviet regime. And then like, although like when you read their books, sometimes they just were writing about like their life. And, like I really love Ukrainian literature from 1920s because, you know, of course they're like, when we were at school, they're just shown to us as victims of Stalinism and that's it. But like, and when you're like at school, you're still too young to read like that deeply, but then you read their books now and you just understand the guys just were like, you know, hanging out, having fun and just write about their lives. It's just, they were really unlucky to live in wrong times. And they don't even like say like, you know, to something against regime or anything in their books. So like, yeah, we had this thing that like, you know, literature is kind of flag, kind of manifesto, like against that. You have to, it's only one way. You have to use literature as like, as a tool, as a weapon. There is this very famous poem of Ukrainian poet who's saying like, my word is my weapon. So like, yeah, we were brought up with this. And then like when writers start questioning things, it's always, you always have people questioning things. Yeah, so, and for your Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the whole gamut of responses to the work. I had a couple of lovely threats from paramilitary groups, so that was charming.
Wow.
I've also had lots of the Protestant community be very grateful that there isn't an awful lot of representation of our story in literature or film. So I've had people be like, thank you so much for putting us into a book. And that, you know, particularly the Firestarters are very tied to a very tight piece of space, like a neighborhood, and the streets and things. People love seeing their own streets and the buildings that they're familiar with. So that has been really nice. I think for me, the biggest thing, it's been really, really humbling to see the response from the Catholic community, and particularly the Irish, extended Irish Catholic community. When you grow up Protestant in Northern Ireland, you're essentially usually British would be how you see yourself. And so I was expecting the book to not be very warmly received in the south of Ireland. And actually it was received incredibly warmly. And even the fact that, you know, I was eligible for both the EU prize for Ireland and the UK. And the fact that the Irish judging panel decided that a book about being British Northern Irish would be what best represents Ireland that's a really bold statement here, and it was very, very humbling. And I've taken with the book, I've got to travel all over Ireland and talk to communities that are largely Catholic from that background, and the response has mostly been, we don't know enough about your culture and your community. Thank you for coming and sharing these stories. We want to learn more. Which is just really, it's been a couple of times I've been in tears on stage because people have been so generous and so warm. So that bodes really well for us. And we don't know what's going to happen here in Ireland in the next 10, 15 years, but there is every possibility that we could look at Northern Ireland being part of Ireland again and not part of the United Kingdom. And if the attitude of people in the south of Ireland is, we don't understand your culture, but we want to learn and we want to include you, that's a hugely positive place to begin from. So it's been quite a heartening experience, actually.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So it's obvious that like in all our novels and also in our like life experience and our background, we do have to touch the topic of violence a lot. And to me, it's just like, I know it's a very general question, but to me, like as a human being, it's like this still, I always ask myself, like, why it's always coming back? Why do human beings have this need, this urge to violence? I really liked your, the excerpt you sent, Lana, the story of like two little girls. I mean, it's like just very innocent, but they play in the snow and they find almost dead bird, but then the bird is not fully dead. And one of the girls, to show that she's cool to probably the boy she she just smashed this sparrow with her boot. So like, you know, like kind of like willingly doing this act of violence, which show that she is stronger and she is cooler. And you have this few quotes, Jen, like I really like this one. The people here are particularly fond of football because it is a game of two sides that involves kicking. And the other one is the troubles are many individual evils caught up together. So yeah, I really like this like two quotes. They're like really witty in some sense, but like, what do you think this source, like this reason, like why human being does have this need of violence, and like even religions, like having the good in their like general, like meant to send something good, they also become the source of fights and wars, and you know, totally questioning the basic sense.
Yeah, I think for me anyway, violence usually comes out of fear. And in our context here, the fear has come from the fear of the unknown. So almost every incidence of violence in my novel anyway is where one side hasn't had any experience of the other side and has villainized them and made them very scary kind of in their heads. So violence then becomes a way of exerting power and showing I'm stronger than you. Look at me, I'm kicking you, I'm being braver than you, I'm pointing a gun at you. And I think what is interesting to me then is peeling back the layers behind that and asking, why does that happen? We here in Northern Ireland have had a lot of problems since the peace process of young people getting caught up in what's left of the paramilitary organizations. So they get lured into these gangs. It's the same thing that's happening with street gangs and things in other parts of the UK. And it usually comes from a fear of the unknown and being in desperately difficult circumstances. So these areas where this happens, it's usually they have high levels of poverty, unemployment, high levels of mental health issues. And when someone comes along with a gun and says to a young person, you feel really desperately unpowerful in your circumstances, have a gun, be part of our gang, feel like you can lord it over someone else and be stronger than them. The temptation to end up there is much stronger than someone who feels secure and open-minded and centered in themselves. They don't feel the need to resort to violence then. So I think we need to do a lot of work of peeling back the layers of making sure people get to know each other, that the community isn't as segregated as it still is, and that those fears are taken away. We still have a 90% segregated school system in Northern Ireland. So 90% of school children do not go to classes in schools with kids from the other community. So it's very easy for fear to build up when you don't know anybody who isn't like you. So yeah, that's what I think violence for me usually comes from fear.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jan. And I guess it's similar here that there's this idea of identity that is not built on what you are, but what you are not. And I feel like a lot of people need to reaffirm this idea of their identity by finger pointing, all that is different, that is unknown, and that creates this kind of fear that Jan talked about. So there's this is why, I mean, the scene that you mentioned, Haska, for me, it was important to show how this initiation into this very masculine world that these girls are growing up in starts with this one small act of violence, and then you feel like you're part of a group. Suddenly you're loved, not for doing something affirmative, but for actually doing something violent. And then on the other hand, I also feel like I do think that as human beings, we have this constant urge to communicate. So not just in words, but just to connect to other people. And I feel there are things in our societies and cultures that cut this short. And then you feel like the only way to just say something is always going to be violent. It's just
the fakes.
Yeah. And I feel like I've been thinking a lot about how our world is going towards this idea that we can communicate in all these different ways. Now we have Zoom and Skype and apps and TikTok and Instagram, whatever, but we're not saying a lot of things. We're not really connecting, and we are staying inside these bubbles. And then I feel like when we are confronted with this otherness, whatever it is, we don't know how to relate to it, because we no longer practice talking to people who are who are different from us. And I think this is very, very dangerous. You mentioned the taxi driver, Hanska. I think taxi drivers are the best way of getting out of your bubble.
Yeah.
Totally,
you know,
because you don't really get to talk to people outside of your own bubble, and you think, oh, everybody thinks like me. No, they don't, and you're probably the minority. So it's a good way of getting out of there. So I feel like we need to maybe, I still believe that art can help in just creating these means of communicating with something that we consider the other. Or maybe I'm just an idealist, but but that's the idea.
So talking about arts and like art therapy and engaging art in this community connections, like I have a question to you, Jan, but I'm sure Lana maybe will have something to comment too, because I find the experience of working with elderly people with dementia very, very interesting. And the thing is that like in the context of our conversation, I thought like, what do you notice more often, like when person is aging and like starts forgetting things? Is this like this feeling that there is an enemy, and the feeling that there is a hostile group? Is it so deep inside that it's still there, or like this aging and this forgetting things brings people more like to peace and to trying to understand and to forgiving? What are your observations like of this?
That's a good question. I think I'll answer it very quickly in two ways. One is, I think one thing we've noticed with working with people who have dementia is I'm mostly, to be honest, working with their loved ones and carers, because a lot of the people who have dementia are now at a point where they can't make the decisions themselves about what groups they're coming to. We engage with them, but it's the choice of their partner, whatever, to bring them along to the group. And they don't care. Like if you have somebody who you really love who's going through a desperately difficult illness, you don't care if they're a Protestant or a Catholic or what ethnic background they're from. You connect on this different level. There's a shared enemy in the room, and the enemy is dementia, and you will do whatever you can to find solidarity and community. So I've loved that. Like I don't know in the groups I work with who's Protestant and who's Catholic. They just all come together. The other question I think is really interesting, and we're just waiting to see what happens. Northern Ireland is one of the few places that has a legacy of conflict, but people live for an awfully long time here. So people are still living into their 80s and 90s, which means there's a very high population of people who have dementia. So the people who are now beginning to develop dementia have very clear recollections of the conflict. So a lot of places like Africa and stuff where there has been conflict situations, they've got a much lower life expectancy, so they don't have as high rates of dementia. So we're interested to see whether, as those people age and develop dementia, do they go back to the trauma that they've suffered? Because quite often people go back in their memory when they develop dementia, and they get stuck in periods that were very, very significant to them. So when they first got married or had children, or for a lot of those people, a significant period is going to be a conflict. And are they going to be stuck in a loop of endlessly remembering really traumatic experiences? There actually hasn't been that many situations in the world where there's been conflict but high life expectancy to be able to see what that looks like. So, the period of the Troubles is 69 to 98. Those people are, my parents' age, are the people who were my age during that period, and they're beginning to develop this now. So it's a scientific thing. I'm part of a research project at Queen's University here in Belfast looking at how literature engages with dementia. So that's one of the things I'm particularly intrigued by in a Northern Irish context. Sorry, that's probably a bit scientific and technical, but it's one of my weird things that I'm very interested in at the minute.
That sounds really, I just have a question for Jan. If you are, maybe I missed that in the beginning, but are you going to use this experience to maybe write about it, write fiction or a novel, dementia and trauma? And this sounds really intriguing.
I don't know. What we're looking at, our research project is looking at how dementia is depicted in fiction. We talked a little bit earlier about appropriation, whether it's okay to tell someone a story or not. every author who tells a story of someone who has dementia is appropriating. And there are only a couple of examples of people with dementia who've been able to write their own narrative, and it's very early in their journey before the disease becomes, takes over their life. So it's a case of ultimate appropriation. You are trying to imagine what life is like for someone who cannot communicate to you what life is like. So that's what we're trying to investigate, and we're hoping that that leads to writing which is better informed, has better practice, is more ethical, because I don't want to be putting words into someone else's mouth. But
Exactly.
I think it's desperately important that we have, those people have a voice, that their stories being told. So yeah, I've actually have quite a few pieces of fiction that are about dementia. I've tried to write from the perspective of someone with dementia. It's very, very difficult to do. But maybe if we learn some of these skills in terms of dementia, when it comes to writing other narratives and other stories that we have limited experiences of, we can have better ethical practice there as well. That's kind of what I'm working on. I think it's really interesting, to be honest.
It sounds really interesting. I mean, I would definitely love to read more about it, and all these other voices that don't have their own voice and that you don't get to really get their story firsthand. So I think your experience there is, it could be useful, even just thinking about, because I'm also thinking about how people here tend to stay inside this period of trauma. Like even people who don't have dementia, but somehow they're stuck. There's this feeling of paralysis. And I feel like that is a really clear example of that, of being paralyzed in maybe the worst part of your life. And I feel like here it happens a lot, Haska. It probably happens there, that people just keep talking about that one thing, and it feels like nobody's really moving on. And then you have the question of, should we just move on, or are there some unresolved issues that we should first clean deep, Yeah.
I tell those stories. Like, it's really interesting to me that you said about the taxi driver telling the story like it was something he tells every day. Like, I sat in a writing workshop about 5 years ago with a group of women in the west of Belfast, which was very, very, very heavily bombed during the Troubles. And they were exchanging anecdotes about who had been blown up the most times. And some people had been blown up 6 or 7 times. And they were horrific anecdotes about finding body parts in the street. And I was crying. Like, I was the facilitator. I was in tears. They were telling it the way you would tell, party anecdotes around a Christmas dinner table. And the whole meaning of the story had been lost. They told it so many times. So some of it is about giving people back the meaning of their story. Like, don't tell that just like it's an anecdote. That's integral to who you are and how your experience has shaped you. So I think some of our job as a writer is to present that back to people, to say, here's your story that you have become desensitized to it. I'm going to tell it a slightly different way so you can feel it again and it's real to you again.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like there's so much you can do. Like it instead of just, let's take this experience and just turn it into this kind of Hollywood 3-act story. Yeah. Just the fact, like, let's talk about why these women turn this into anecdotes. Let's talk about why they're so desensitized. Let's try to, remind them that their stories matter, that their stories are just as important as these other stories. Let's try to look at details. So maybe we can facilitate this and not run the risk of appropriating. But I feel like with a lot of respect, just helping these stories get out. I think that is really, really important, because I can see it happening here too. There are a lot of women here in Bosnia and Serbia and Croatia who are not educated, who cannot write, who have stories that to them are just normal life. And it could be anything from abuse at home, from the fact that their family were murdered during the war, being raped. So to them, it's just, this is what happens. It's like, it doesn't make me special. And I feel this is slowly dehumanizing them in a way. So it is important sometimes to say, yeah, you know, when I published my book, some people wrote to me and said, oh, this really happened to me. I had to change my name. But I didn't think about it that much. It was just something that you did. And then they would be grateful that they found their story in a book, saying, this is a literary subject. This is not, you know, it's not like it's not good enough. It's not like it's not important enough. Your story is good enough to be told. And they were happy to recognize their own stories there. So in this way, I think we can be these facilitators.
I just finished a piece about my grandmother, my dad's father, and the last line of it is, tell yourself your grandmother was like every other woman in Northern Ireland, and this is why you never asked. And I feel terrible that I didn't ever ask her about her experiences, because they were so similar to every other woman of her era. Whereas they're remarkable, because everyone is remarkable. I'm thinking about this a lot at the minute. Sorry, we've gone off on
I'm just looking because I had this quote of yours too, which sounds like they all were like their mothers and their grandmothers. It's also in this description of Belfast. I don't remember how it sounds exactly, but like it says that every woman here is just like her mother was before, and like her grandmothers were before. Yeah, this kind of continuity of generations. But like also on the other end of our life, like we were talking about growing old, but like the childhood is the other like opposite. And like in our books and in general, we come back to childhood quite often and talking about childhood and having these childhood memories. Do you think childhood is actually our metaphorical home? Like, you know, because the memories from childhood are always so bright, probably you just get there and like, oh, what's happening? So is it our metaphorical home?
Who's gonna?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know about that, because it's a very strange place. You know, the childhood, again, it's another story. Sometimes you feel like you read about yourself in a book. You can't really remember if things really happened. And also your language wasn't developed enough to create like really coherent memories at that point. So to me, it's immensely interesting to go back there and also think about the way a child looks at the world. I remember when we were little here, when you go to school, you know, the first day at school, you don't really think about, wow, that name sounds Muslim and that name sounds Catholic and that name sounds Orthodox. You didn't even know the difference. It was just, to you, it was just kids. And I remember how in that way, children were actually acting more mature than adults, because they were not dividing people based on these external facts. And then I remember, I don't know, we would have like these classes about faith and religion or whatnot. And then for some reason, the teacher would just tell some students to leave. And I remember being so jealous and envious, like, well, how did they get to leave and play outside? And I have to listen to this, you know, and learn prayers by heart and whatnot. And then, of course, when you grow up, you realize, oh my God, these children were excluded because they were Muslim. When you realize that this is why I wanted to go back to Alice, because Alice is a little girl, and then in Wonderland, there's this sense of logic that to her doesn't make sense, but she has to follow the rules, even though they're completely ludicrous. And it felt like that growing up here, that there are just these rules of you're this and you're that, and because of that, you do this. But to you, when you're a child, it doesn't really make sense, because a child is not, you know, a child is nothing in terms of division. And maybe I'm generalizing, but at least I think it doesn't work this way. What do you think?
I don't know. I hope childhood isn't your metaphorical home, because like bits of my childhood weren't that great. So I'm quite glad that it doesn't have to be your metaphorical home. Like, I'm really interested in how we develop as people and how there's always a little bit of the child that comes with you kind of thing. And I think I was listening to a thing a few days ago about how in story we exist in the past, present and future at the same time. So, you know, when you're writing a character who is an adult, you also have access to the child of them as well. And you have the access to the potential of what they're going to be in the future. And I think that's a really nice way to think about story, that you're always bringing a little bit of your childhood you with you. And also just that thing of the layers of understanding that build up as you get older and see more of the world, like you're talking about, Lana, of realizing this thing happened and I didn't understand what it meant until I got much older. But sometimes the innocent first interpretation is actually the best interpretation of it. My challenge for myself this year has been, I'm rereading all of the 66 Agatha Christie crime novels in order because it's their 100th anniversary. It's terrible. I don't know why my parents let me, but they let me read them all when I was about 8. And they're so unsuitable. They're full of like murder and adultery and incest and all sorts of things. Now reading them at 40, I'm understanding things that I didn't understand before, but it's weird, I'm also getting these little like flashbacks to being 8 and reading that, and you know, something like And Then There Were None, which is the one where everyone gets murdered on an island. I wish I could read it as an 8-year-old again because it's so terrifying. I can't now because I've got these 40-year-old sensibilities that dull all of the experiences. So some of it I'm jealous of, wee 8-year-old me, you know, under the duvet with the flashlight, reading and scaring the crap out of myself. I wish I could do that again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing all these insights. So basically, we're almost coming to the end of our discussion in the program of Writers Insights. Just the last short question, maybe you're already tired of it, but still, could you share shortly how lockdowns changed your routines and your routines as writer? Was it did it have a good effect on you, or did it have a bad effect on you? Did you find some specific inspirations or not, Lana?
I think this was the first time in my life that I've experienced a writing block. I've never had that. I always used to think that when writers say that, they're just lazy. It's like, what do you mean? Just sit down and just write anything, you know? It was so arrogant of me. And this time I just couldn't bring myself to I would open my computer and it just didn't make any sense, you know? And at the time I was in Zagreb. So not only did we have the lockdown, but also a major earthquake happened. So there was all this going on. And I wrote about it in one column, there's so much reality. There's too much reality for me to get into fiction. And I don't consider myself, I don't write essays. I don't, you know, it's so I felt the world is kind of falling apart, and here I am trying to make some sense. So I watched a really good documentary about Joan Didion. I really recommend it if you haven't seen it. And in this documentary, she talks about this period in her life where it felt like everything was falling apart. And writing, as she had thought of it before, just didn't make any sense anymore. So she realized, if I am to write again, I have to find a way of including this disorder. And this was really helpful to me because, of course, when you have all these, you know, first responders, you have these people, health workers, you have people real heroes, and then you feel here I am writing my little story. It's really hard to remind yourself that this is still relevant and we still need to have writing. So I don't know if you girls had this problem.
I didn't have writer's block. I unfortunately or fortunately was stuck on a commission when everything kicked off. So I had to I was commissioned to write 10 short stories for the BBC in 8 weeks. So I had to write 10 stories in 8 weeks, which was crazy productivity for me, and I just didn't. The producer was breathing down my neck, so I didn't have any way of not doing it. The weird thing for me has been I can't write in anything but the first person at the minute. And I don't know if that's happened to anybody else, but I would normally sit in the third person or occasionally second person, but never touch the first person because it's too close. And all I've been able to do for the last 4 months is write first person narrative. I think it's because I live by myself and we've been quite strict on lockdown here. So I've not had that much outside influence apart from online stuff for 4.5 months. I'm too much in my own head. And all the first person narratives, even though like they're men and children and all sorts of different people, they're all just versions of me. So I'm basically just writing myself over and over and over again. Hopefully that'll end soon.
Yeah, I had a very good companion for lockdown. So I had to come back, basically. I had the trip back to childhood, like, you know, reading kids' books. And like, actually, at some point, I did have this feeling that it looks like, you know, this like permanent vacation when you just like, when I was at school, like we didn't have opportunity to travel during summer holidays. So summer holidays usually were like long and slow and you get bored. We didn't have gadgets. We didn't have things to do. So you just had to look for entertainment. And yeah, that's like this first 2 months, it was just really like, you know, going back to seeing the world from the perspective of 7-year-old, which is actually cool at some moments. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I'll just remind that today we were presenting 2 novels of 2 brilliant writers. It's Jan Carson and her novel, The Firestarters, right? And Lana Bastasic and her novel, Uchwyci Zajca. Is it correct? Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Good, great. So I really hope that that Ukrainian publishers are going to be interested in your works. And we're having this conversation as part of Book Forum 27 that is going virtually, unfortunately, but I hope that on the 28th, we're going all to meet. This is supported by Ukrainian Culture Fund and European Union Prize for Literature and Creative Europe. Thank you very much and hope to see you somewhere else.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Thank you.